All right, hopefully if John's going to join us, he'll be here soon. I'm recording. Today is Wednesday, the 22nd of February. And as it says right now, the first thing we're going to do is go over quickly the chapter 6 and 7 projects. Then I'm going to lecture on chapter 8, transferring data from controllers. Now, just so that you are aware of it, let me bring John in. Hello, John. We just started, and like I said, today I'm going to go. I've already completed the Chapter 6.1 project for you, and that should be out there on a GitHub repo. I'll show you quickly what I had to do for 6.2. And also, just so you're aware of it, if it seems like I'm pausing every once in a while, my internet, they've let me know that Charter has let me know that they're having problems with the wind that's going on. So tomorrow and Friday will both be lab days. There'll be no taping done. And I am right lockstep with Evan. We have been meeting every Friday morning and we're at the same spot. Typically, he is lecturing for a couple class periods a week and not for the entire time. And the rest of the time he's giving lab. And that's exactly what I've been doing. Next Monday will be the chapters 6 and 7 hands-on test. So 8 will not be on this test. We're probably going to have a test about every 2 chapters. All right. And I'm writing it this weekend, so I can't tell you yet what's on it. All right. Your chapter 6 and 7 labs and homework are due Sunday by midnight. All right. So with all that said, let's just get into it here. Now, 6.1 we've already talked about, and for 6.2.
Mr. Scott.
Yes.
Did you say 6 and 7 are due Sunday, or 6, 7, and 8?
No, just 6 and 7. No, I'm not going to lecture on it on Wednesday and then expect you to get the stuff done on Sunday. It's just 6 and 7. And
Okay.
the test on Monday will be just 6 and 7. So the following week, all right, I'm hoping we can get 8 and 9 done. All right, that'll be like March 5th or something like that. All right. So for 6.2, basically you just had to add these routes. All right. So really all that I did for 6.2, this is 7 here, so. I just used my original one. Feel free to do the same, or you can make a copy, whatever you want to do. All right. But basically all I did is I went into the controller here and set up these routes on top. That was it. So it's not like there's a whole heck of a lot that you've got to do. All right. And again, we have to go from the most specific to the most general. And that's exactly that's the way I read it, that they told us to do it. And then they even gave you things that you could use to test. I tested it and they all seemed to be okay as far as I could tell. All right. So hopefully there's no questions on that. Like I said, there wasn't a whole heck of a lot to do on there. All right. And then for chapter 7, you were supposed to build a website from scratch. I took a little different approach. I'll show it to you in just a second. But make sure that you go in there and you have to create an areas folder under your main folder. Under that areas folder, you have to create a help folder. Under help, you need to create a controllers folder with a home controller and the tutorial controller in it. And under views, a views folder, a home folder, a shared folder, and a tutorial folder. Other than that, it's pretty much the same stuff. If you create it the way we've been creating it, you can, if you want to, totally just remove. That's what I did. I just got rid of the models folder. All right, because there's nothing in here with the database. Now with mine, there is an error in mine right now. And like I said, I know where it is, but I can at least show you my setup on this. I think it's here. And like I said, I've got some errors in it. I don't even know if it's going to run or not, but yeah. So let's see if I do go to here. No, it's not even going to run. It's not even going to go to the home folder. So let's see. All right. Well, I can, like I said, I can at least show you the way that I set it up. All right. There's a problem in my help thing right now. And it's, let's see. So my homepage, what I did was I literally went and made a copy of the homework and saved it as a ping file. So when you bring it up, that's actually what comes up. All right. Then for the about page, I went online and found out some stuff about areas. All right. And put that in. And then for the contact page, that's it. I mean, there wasn't a whole heck of a lot in there. But where it's screwing up right now is I haven't totally incorporated my sections yet. All right. So I've got that in there. And then I went in and created the under the main project, created an areas folder. In the areas folder, I've got a help folder. And in help, I've got a home controller without much in it yet. And I've got the tutorial controller. And then we've got our index file. Like I said, this is still a work in progress. This, you need your own layout file for this because I wanted it to look different. So I made a help layout. And then this is all they wanted us to do for page 1, page 2, and page 3, right, to allow us to go back and forth. I should have that done by tomorrow. Hopefully I will. All right. But hopefully, you won't find too much trouble with that one. And then on the case study, and I've fallen way behind on the case studies, but for 6.1, as it says, you're supposed to modify Sports Pro so that it'll basically set this up. So again, it's going to be a matter of you having to do two things for this. Number one, you should go in and just change this, make it a Jumbotron with a dark background, and then go in and, it says use attribute routing. All right. So you should be able to, I think that when I started to do this, I went into the program.cs file and made some changes to it, but I haven't finished that one yet. Then in 7.1, as it says, you were supposed to improve the Razor views. All right. And as it says, the nav bar when the program or product manager is displayed. So right now, basically, I believe that we talked about this before, that everything should work in here up on your nav bar, except we haven't done registrations. So ideally, at least, home will get you there, your products there, etc. So there is an example of products. There is an example of technicians, etc. So as it says there, get the nav links to work correctly. Convert the Razor for each loops that display them so they display item tag helpers instead. You should be able to take that pretty much out of the book because that's what they did in the book when they changed some stuff around. And then as far as removing the jQuery libraries, again, what that means is we don't want that to be in any layout file that's going to be put in there for all of our pages. We want to just bring it in on an as needed basis on the pages that need it. All right. So, and we'll be talking today in just a couple minutes about temp data in more depth and breadth of coverage. We'll be talking about view bag and view data and a few other things, but this is what you'll be working on next time. There's an 8.1 and an 8.2. It says you'll use temp data to display messages. So in other words, when you add something, you'll bring a message up here, something like that. And we're also going to talk about view models today, which we have not discussed yet. So that's what's going to be due here. And then for the other one, for chapter 8, what you'll have to do is build this trip log thing. All right. And you'll do that one from scratch. All right. So let's go in and start actually talking about the chapters. So let me bring that up here. All right. So chapter 8, I'm on page 287. It's not that it's a super long chapter, but it's super detailed. Also, if you have not read it yet, you really should go back and read it. They actually build an app in this chapter, and it's a National Football League app if you haven't seen it. And it allows you to go in and you can you can look up different teams and different conferences and different divisions, etc. And it allows you to add stuff. Now, as far as allowing you to add stuff, it's not a permanent add that it puts in here. So it'll ask you if you want to be able to add something, but it doesn't physically add it. And it doesn't add it because when we get into chapter 9, which should be Tuesday of next week, all right, when we get into chapter 9, then we'll talk about session state and cookies. And then you'll go back, and right now there will be an NFL app version 1 and an NFL app version 2. And in the version 1, it's pretty much very similar to the stuff we've done before. In version 2, they're going to make some changes because they're bringing in view models. And then in sessions 3 and 4, which is in the next chapter, we'll talk about session state and bringing in cookies and the like, so that you're able that when you make a change and you add something to a favorite, okay, it's going to actually be added and it'll stay there. If that makes no sense, don't worry about it. All right. So as they mention here, so far the book is concentrated on using the action methods. So we've used the iAction result, all right, to get also use the content if we wanted to just send some text. All right, this chapter, as it says, is going to be more detailed. That's the first part of this, the first 10 or so pages, talking all about how this action result works, and giving you more talk about view data and view bag. There's advantages to using one as opposed to the other, and there's some disadvantages of using both. The main disadvantages, I believe, with both view data and view bag, you don't get IntelliSense, all right, which may not sound like a big thing, but what that means, since you don't have built-in IntelliSense for those, is if you have errors in your code, they won't typically be shown until you run the program. And when you bring in view models, which is what we'll do later in the chapter, that does have IntelliSense in it. So it makes it a little easier to work with. All right. So how to use action result objects, how to use view data and view bag, version 1 of the Teams app, view models, redirects, temp data, and version 2 of the Teams app. When I get done today, and I'm going to really take my time on this, but when I get done, that's going to be it for the week, and the rest of the week will be a lab. And like I said, to my knowledge, when we talked last Friday, Evan and I were lockstep as far as, you know, his class is in the same place that your class is in. All right. So it says here, the action type provides information to MVC about the HTTP types. Now, notice what it says here. The response can be a lot of different things. It can be HTML, which is pretty much what we've looked at so far, but it can also be JSON like we used last semester. And every time you bring in HTML and you bring in JSON, it might work, it might not work. Well, if it doesn't work, you might bring in an HTTP status code like a 404. If it does work, you'll typically bring in an HTTP status code like a 200. All right. As you'll see later on in the chapter, that if you do a redirect, depending on whether or not you want to do a permanent redirect or a non-permanent redirect, there'll be a 301 or a 302 that's going to get returned as far as the HTTP status code. So as it says, the table here is going to list some of the common types that can be returned. Okay, so the bottom line is this. We've been working with this. We've been working with this so far. Okay, we've been working with this. And so this is the parent, so to speak. And everything that's underneath this, you'll notice, is an action result. So this is an interface. This is an abstract class. So these are the different things that can be returned. And this is not a complete list, but these are the ones that are going to be returned most often. I'm not going to read them. You can see them. All right. The 4 that are here are shown down here along with a few other ones. All right. And if I did click on that link that was shown here, and underneath here, as it says, it's going to show even more, all right, that are underneath here. So if you want to see more, you can go ahead and click on that link. Ideally, at least, when you take a look at this, as far as what's happening, it makes at least some sense. All right, a thing just popped up on my screen too, that where I live, they just announced we're under a tornado watch. So my wife is, if she comes in here and says, hey, there's one that's been spotted here, I'm going to pause class, just so you know that. All right. So as it says, within a controller, an action type can return any type of an action object. All right. And again, we have been working with this all semester. All right. And we have basically just been returning almost exclusively, just a view with a view result. All right. In this chapter, we'll look at the redirect. All right. But we're not going to really hit on much of the rest of this. We've also looked at the content result. All right. I don't want to sit here and read to you any more than you want me to read to you. So let's just start going over to here. All right. And again, what we've been working with almost exclusively thus far has been the view method in here. And you'll notice that the view method is overloaded. We've talked about that before. All right. That by default, if you just have the view with the paren, as it says, it's the default view for the current controller. All right. And the current, that action method. All right. But if you want to transfer, as it says, a model object, you're going to see a little bit of that later. All right. And you can sit there and go back and forth and do stuff within the view that you're at. I should say within the controller that you're at, or you can go to another controller. All right. And again, they show you some examples. All right. After a while, I will tell you, and I know that I sound like a broken record here, but you have to read the chapter. All right. I can't even tell you how many times I've read this chapter. And I've read it. I've got both a PDF and I've got the hard copy of the book, and the book is all marked up. So as it says, the controller class provides several methods that create objects. All right, when Visual Studio creates action methods, it uses iAction result that we just looked at. Now, it's if you look at that third bullet there, it says if an action result only returns one type of action object, it's a good practice to specify that subtype as the return type. All right. So in other words, rather than just saying view or view result, if it's going to be returning something else, you should put the type that it's going to be returning. All right. If an action method may return multiple types, you can specify the action result abstract class or the iAction result. And we've been using the iAction result. All right. Okay. Now let's talk view data and view bag. All right. And view bag basically is a subset of view data, but let's talk about it anyway. So says in earlier chapters, we talked about view bag. We talked a little bit about view data, but now they're going to look at them in more depth and breadth of coverage. Okay, now the tornado, I don't know if you could hear that in the background, but that's going off now. So like I said, if my wife comes in and says, hey, they've spotted one on the ground here, I'm going to unplug the computer and go down in the basement. Okay, so as it says, the view data property of the controller class has a type of view data dictionary. It's all a bunch of working with key value pairs. So when you look in here, as an example, what do we have? Well, we've got view data. The key is book. The value is Alice in Wonderland. Here, the key is price. The value is 9.99. Again, when you're working with these things, we talked about this kind of stuff before. you're setting data. So don't go and put dollar signs in here and commas in here, etc. You can do that later in the actual view that's going to present that stuff. All right. A couple of other properties they mentioned that, again, this is the one you're going to use the most often. This for each that's in here. All right. Now they've, you could, if you wanted to know how many items were in there, you could use the count. But with the for each, you don't need a count. But quite often with a for each, you're going to do it in a manner similar to this. So you'll notice again, you've got the key value pairs where you've got both the key and then the value. All right. Not that it's ever mandatory that you show them both. You could show one, you could show the other. All right. And this is where they're coming in and they're saying here is where you would go in and actually, when you are presenting it then in the view, that's when you'd actually go in and do the formatting. All right. Now, with a bunch of this stuff, as they mentioned here, notice it says razor code that uses the null conditional operator. If something can possibly be null, you have to account for it. And this can be tricky. All right. Putting in the right question mark, putting the question mark in the right place, seeing if you need more than one question mark, etc. All right. And what are they doing here? Well, if you take a look in the first case, the first example that they have there, they are casting in both the data type, so the key for, and the value basically. All right. And here they're working with a reference type, so it's the entire reference type that's being cast. All right. Remember what the reference types are. They're typically, when we've been using reference types thus far, we've been doing that so that we can basically include one table inside of another table. All right. All right. Now the difference here, as it says, is the view bag is dynamic. So as it says, you can add properties to the view bag and determine those properties at runtime. I mean, that can be important. I mean, let's, as an example, if you were doing some kind of an app where you were working with employees, maybe you would want to do something different based on whether or not you had designated that employee type as being full-time versus part-time. All right, there could be a thing with health benefits or whatever. So they show you some examples in here, but I do want to just mention this before we look at the examples. As it says, under the hood, the view bag property stores its data in the view data dictionary. So it's doing it as that, but as I said, it's sort of a subset. And they even mention here, you can think of it as an alias for the data dictionary. And as they mention here, since it's dynamically typed, you don't need to do as much casting. All right. For that reason, the view bag is typically easier to work with view data. Okay. But it says, and this is what we're going to get to in just a bit, and I think I mentioned this earlier, it says one disadvantage of both of them, they don't provide compile time checking or IntelliSense. So if you make a mistake, all right, it's not going to flag it as being an error. All right, that's as it says there, if you make mistakes in the controller or you make mistakes in the view or both. All right, and as mentioned here, that's why there a lot of programmers don't even like to use them. Okay, it says they'll use view models because the view model comes with built-in IntelliSense, built-in time checking. All right. So this looks very similar to what we did before. So if you go back and look at this, view data book equals Alice, view data price equals $9.99, and then the count, etc. Well, that looks virtually identical. In fact, this one does look virtually identical. And this one is just that you're saying view bag. All right. And we have been using view bag thus far rather than really using view data. All right. But you see the same stuff that we talked about before. Now here, if you remember with view bag, the price, okay, but previously we had to take two things in here and we had to go and cast them. So it was double view data price, okay, etc., and then double question mark view data price question mark. Whereas when you use it with the view bag, there's not as much to do. All right, you don't have to cast it to a double, but you still need the question mark after the price. All right. And again, if you're not going to take the time to go and read the page on the left, please read the page on the right. All right. I think it's going to help you a lot, especially when you take the test next week, and also especially when you when you're working on the written tests for the chapters. All right. So I don't know what your understanding is, both of you or all the people in the class, of the National Football League, and it really doesn't matter because at the top of page 297, as it says there, there's a National Football Conference and an American Football Conference. Each conference has, so there's an NFC North, NFC South, NFC East, NFC West, and the same with the AFC, and each has 4 teams. All right, if you do the math, it comes out that there's 32 teams. So what they're listing here, as it says, when you first load this, the only semblance of order in here is it is showing you the logos for each team, and it is showing you those in alphabetic order. All right, Arizona, Atlanta, Baltimore, Buffalo, Carolina, Chicago, etc. So it's in that order. When you come in here and you choose a conference, all right, then this will change. So you can come in here and say, do you want all of the conferences, or you just want the teams in one conference? So at least in many ways, this is similar to the example that we just were going through. All right, where we were adding the the different questions, the FAQ thing. It's not the same, but the idea are at least similar. All right. Now, in this first example, they build this without using, all right, basically our new view model that we're going to get to in just a couple minutes. All right. So it's, again, there's nothing wrong with doing it this way. And I believe the reason that, as always, that Murach shows it like this is sometimes it's done this way, sometimes it's not. All right. Sometimes what you're going to see is, especially with legacy code that's older, you'll see things done all sorts of different ways. Typically, what'll happen, what I've always found back when I was programming professionally, is that what you found is different people would do things in different ways. All right. Unless you had some kind of a directive from the people you work for that said you must do it this way, people did it in the way that they thought made the most sense to them. All right. So as it says, first we're going to look at the code for the model layer. As it says, it's stored in the models folder. So when you look at it here, okay, notice we've got a conference, the equivalent of a conference table or class, a division, and a team. All right. And there's even a few things in here you may or may not have thought about, such as, well, the conference ID and the name should make sense. The division ID and the name should make sense. The team ID and the name should make sense. But again, notice conference, we're getting from there. division we're getting from there, and then we're just using a string image. All right. And I believe that, I think it's in this chapter where the logo is not going to be really doing that much. You know, like if you click on it, you're not going to go to a team page or anything like that. I think they start to incorporate that in the next chapter. All right. So as they mentioned, the conference class is an entity class representing a conference. The division is an entity representing a division. The team represents a team. Okay. And again, it has the properties for conference and division to hold information about those. All right. As it says, since the app only needs to read and display data, the team class doesn't have a foreign key property. Okay. Because we're not doing anything special with it. The context class, okay. So let's take a quick look at that. And if we have to, we'll jump back here. Context, as always. All right. As we come in here, all right, they're not shut off. We have two. All right. All right. And they also mentioned there, it says, note that the code that seeds the team doesn't use team objects to do the seeding. That's because the team object doesn't have foreign key properties for the conference ID and the division ID. All right. It says, but you do want to include these values in the database table. So to do that, it seeds the team data using an anonymous object that uses that stuff right here. So rather than saying here, new conference in here, new entity, I'm sorry, new division in here, we don't say new team in here. We just say new. All right. Next, they jump in and talk about the home controller. Okay, this is going to be starting up the same way we usually do, where we will have that CTX in there. Notice when the app starts, Model View Controller automatically creates a team context object and passes it to the constructor, very similarly to what we have been doing. The home controller, everything is done inside of index. All right, so when we look in here, that's it. Okay, so we don't need to add any more methods into here other than that. So again, here's our CTX, here's our constructor. Nope, there's our constructor. And here again is index. All right, and notice what we're passing in. We are defaulting it basically so that if we put nothing in there, it'll default to all conferences or both conferences, and it'll default to all divisions. As you saw earlier, that's the way that it looked when the program first ran. Then they are using the view bag in there, as it says, to store, all right, whatever you've chosen, for lack of better words. All right. Then in English, what they're saying is, hey, did you choose anything? If it's not equal to all, you've got to run and make sure that you've got the right conference chosen. And if the division is not all, you've got to make sure that the right division is chosen. So you run one, 0, 1, or 2 different Lambda queries to get the information you want, and then you pass that back. All right. You'll notice a little bit of custom routing here. All right. So, basically, this again is going to allow us to come in if we want to and come in there with the controller in the index and put in the name of the conference we want and the name of the division that we want. All right. All right. What's shown next in here then is the layout. As they say, it's very similar to what we've done in the past. So they've used Bootstrap to keep it pretty, and they've come in here with the title that should have already been set earlier, and they just reproduce it. All right. I don't know why they make that big a thing. I believe the reason that they show it like this all the time and they show it in this manner is that what this is going to automatically do is, as long as wherever you are, if you've gone in and you set the title should always be correct. All right, depending on where you are in the program, etc. All right, then they start to break it down, and next, as it says there, is the code for the home index. All right, let's take a look at that. It says here that this is a model and it's an I enumerable of team. And just so you know where they got that, I thought, where was it? Well, I just saw it, but now I don't remember where it was. But it actually was shown in here that it was an I enumerable of type team. All right. So the point is kind of important that you put that in there. All right. All right. Again, we're setting the title. Right? And there's a heck of a lot of stuff in here. But the majority of the stuff that you see in here, this is just basically setting up our table, or the equivalent of our table. It's not really a table, I guess. And this is populating it. All right. So it's going through and it's grabbing everything. And you'll notice, sorry, boy, hold on a sec. That what this is doing is, it's, for lack of better words, it's populating the side, the stuff that we're showing on the side. So it's first coming through and it's showing the 2 conferences, and then it's populating the 4 divisions. And then in here, it's going to be populating those logos. All right. So I don't think I have to show you this, but just in case. That's the first one that's being done. That's the first for each. That's the second for each. And this is the third for each. Okay, so this is new. So if you say, well, yeah, make sure you read this. Okay, because this is something we have not really worked with before. You can see they talk about the way we've done things in the past. I'm not going to read it to you. All right. And they also mentioned that, again, in this first version of this NFL Team Naps, they use the view bag. And as we already mentioned, the IntelliSense and the built-in compiler checking does not work with view bag, does not work with view data. All right. And that's why they're saying, so you have to wait until runtime to discover these problems. Well, that can add on to your time that it's going to take you to go and create a project. So it says that's why many developers prefer to use a view model to transfer data to a view. All right. So notice it's a class. All right. By convention, it ends with view model, but you don't have to. All right. And I believe we're going to put them in the model folder. So probably ending them with view model would make a lot of sense, because then you'd be able to differentiate them as opposed to a quote, a view model, to differentiate that from a quote, regular model, unquote. All right. So as it says, it holds all the data view requires. So for lack of better words, you can kind of look at it as being like a helper class. It's not the best way to put it, but it's kind of what it is. So as it says in here, what do we have? It says the first two properties are the ID values for the active conference and the division. All right, where the default is set to all. The next property is the collection of team objects that the view needs. And as it says, the last two properties are collections of these two objects. All right, this is where it gets important. View models are lightweight classes that contain only data. They can have helper methods, all right, but it should just be to help you along the way. You shouldn't be putting any code in a view model that impacts the other parts of your application, all right, like the underlying model or the controller. And that's what they say in here. So when we look at this, all right, in some ways, at least, in some ways, it looks like a regular model, but there's no DB set, there's no seating, because that's not what we're doing here. This is a class that is going to be used by our models so that we'll basically bring that in so that we will have the IntelliSense and the compile time checking. All right. And one thing about this, I know Mr. Smith and I had this talk 2 or 3 years ago, that it's like as soon as I asked him about this, and I think he agreed with me. I said, geez, there's so much stuff in here that it's almost like as soon as students understand something, we go to something else, or we look at a different way of doing it, or a quote better way, unquote, of doing it. And he agreed. All right. That's one of the reasons that we went and transferred over to teaching Android. All right. But now we made the decision to go the other way. All right. In the end, I'm hoping that this is going to be a good decision, and that you'll be able to tell people that you're a full stack developer and you've even developed web apps using C#. All right. That's the take that I got on from Mr. Gudmiston. So, as they say, it's a regular C# class. It defines a model of the data that's needed by the view. All right. I don't think there's anything else in there that we haven't already mentioned. All right. As you go in and start adding this stuff, it's going to mean that you're going to have to go in and start changing other things. So what they're getting into here, what they're leading up to, all right, is we're going to have a version 2 coming up in a few pages of the NFL Teams app. And again, they're going to go in and replace where they were using the view bag with using this view model. All right. So as it says here, the first code shows the updated index method. Here, the two parameters have been replaced with a type of view model right there. So we're not passing those in anymore. And then notice it's model.conferences, model.divisions. So everything that's in there under that model is now available. All right, including checking whether or not, all right, you didn't choose anything, meaning that it would be defaulting to all, or if you chose something for both the conference and the division. All right. And you can see the changes that are in here as well. And you're still going to have to come in here and write your for eaches, etc. But the idea is, hopefully at least, this is easier to read. It results in a little bit less code typically. And again, it has the built-in IntelliSense, and maybe just as importantly, if not more so, the built-in compile time checking. All right. All right. let's go over this redirect a request, and maybe we'll take a break a little bit early. I want to see what the weather situation is like outside. But the next thing that's discussed is redirecting a request. And I believe after that, oh, where is that? Okay, we will go a little further then, because I want to go when we get to version 2. So when we get to that page, we'll take a break. All right. So the next thing they talk about in here is redirection. I mentioned this at the beginning of class. I don't want to be that repetitious. You can read this, and what they get to in here is they talk about these found and move permanently. Move permanently, you know, I think that when I started at Rankin, I don't believe that our our web address at the time, I don't believe it was https://rankin.edu. I don't believe it was that. I believe it was http://www.rankin.edu. All right, but somewhere along the line it was changed. So when you do a move permanently, as they're saying right there, the idea is it's a one and done. So what's going to happen is it tells the browser, all right, that anytime you request that old one to automatically change it. All right. Now, if you've got something under construction, or you've got something that may be changing and then changing back or whatever, you wouldn't use the 301. You'd probably use the 302 that they show right here. All right. And you'll notice that there's different subtypes depending on the one that you're using. I'm not going to read these. You can see them all here. All right. And again, you'll notice that many of them are overloaded. So do you want to go and be in the current controller? Do you want to go, to the default action in the current controller, to a non-default action in the current controller, to another controller, etc. All right, and that's what they're talking about in here. All right. The next thing that's in here is they talk about what's typically referred to as, I don't know, the PRG pattern. I've heard it called different things. All right. And they do mention in there, and this should make sense to you. Right? Get requests are designed to retrieve data but be idempotent. In other words, for lack of better words, they don't make changes on the server. What that means is, in essence, even though they're not referred to like this, in essence, get requests are read only. All right. That's not exactly true, because when you make a get request, you saw this in the movie thing that we did in some of the other ones. And if you, when we did the add edit item, all right, it was a get request, but it was bringing up, with the edit, it was bringing up information. Well, it'll be the post where you actually submit that information. All right. But as they say there, because of the fact that it's referred to as being idempotent, all right, the user can resubmit a get request multiple times by clicking the refresh button, and it doesn't affect any data on the server. Now, posts are not idempotent. The reason that that's important, if you've never seen that before, I don't know if you've ever done this, but there have been times when I have gone in and tried to submit a form or something else, and it seems like it hangs. And rather than giving it time, I tend to be very impatient and I press that again. So you're sending that post out again. Typically, that will not be what you want to have happen. All right. I mean, think about it. If I go out to udemy.com and I basically come out there and I have them bring me up a bunch of different classes that I can take online. And now I choose a couple, I put them into my cart, and I click a submit button on the cart. All right. And now nothing's happened for a couple minutes. So I click submit again. I don't want to have to buy those same things twice, is what we're saying. All right. So as they mention here, to prevent that, it says most browsers display a message if the user resubmits a post request. And it can be all sorts of things. All right. You can tell them, hey, you've already submitted this. Do you want to do it again? Or whatever. All right. And with the example that they've shown here, all right, maybe you've seen this kind of thing before. So to prevent this, it says it's common to use the PRG pattern when you're making changes to the server. All right. So it says the add method handles the post that updates the server. And it says the last statement in the action uses the redirect to action, okay, method to return a 302 found status to the browser. Okay, it says, as it says, this tells the browser to issue a GET request for the index method for the home controller. So in other words, what's happening is after you've submitted the post request, boom, it's going to redirect you back to the home page. All right. And that's what they talk about in here. I mean, that's what they're getting to. It says the downside of this is that it requires a second round trip to the server. But the upside is you're not going to basically, be ticking a user off because they've accidentally gone in and ordered something twice. They mentioned there that if you have a post action that makes changes on the server and then returns a view, you should consider using PRG to split that action into two action methods. All right, because you are indeed doing two things. So as it says there, you can use a post action method to make the changes, then redirect to the get. All right, I thought they showed an example of it in here. Not like I thought it was, no. Okay. All right. So far as mentioned in here, we've talked about how to transfer data from a controller to a view, but sometimes you want to go from controller to controller. All right. Now, to go from controller to controller, it says you can use the built-in temp data that's available from controllers and views. So as it says, it works much like view data. It's key value driven. But where it differs, as it says, is in how long the data persists. And you can have some control over this. You'll see more of this in the next chapter as well. All right. But as it says, with view data, the data persists for the life of the request. It's boom, it's one and done. All right. That's the main reason that we talk about the web being stateless, is stuff like that. With temp data, though, the data persists across multiple requests. Says, in fact, it persists until it is read. Once it's read, it's marked as read, and then you end the request. But there's even other things you can do with that. All right. You can tell it to persist beyond this, even if it has been read. There are settings that you can put in there that basically say, hey, mark it as read, but don't get rid of it. All right. I might want it. It's the equivalent kind of caching it, is what they're talking about in here. All right. And that's what they get into. I'll let you read it yourselves, but I'm pretty much telling you everything that's in there. All right. Now, it says by default, temp data can only store data that has been serialized. All right. So it says in the next chapter, this is the bottom of the page here, it says they present a technique that allows you to store complex data types in temp data. If you've never heard of serializing and deserializing, what they're saying is if data has to be serialized, that you have to break it down. So if it's in a data structure, you've got to take it and break it down when you serialize it into not the data structure, but the collection of data items that make up the data structure. All right. And again, there are some examples here. If you haven't read the chapter, I don't think it's going to make a whole heck of a lot of sense. But here, as it says, here's where you're storing a string in temp data. and here's where you're retrieving a string from temp data. As always, what's the difference? When you're storing it, the temp data is on the left-hand side of the equal sign. When you're retrieving it, you're putting it into a local variable, and it's on the right-hand side of an equal sign. All right. Now, in this example, I've mentioned this before, but I want to say it again. And that is right here, it says, when you click a button that you want to add Seahawks to your favorites, it's going to give you a message that it did that. But in here, we haven't talked about saving session state or about cookies. So it's going to give you that message, but technically it's not saving it anywhere. It will when we get to versions 3 and 4 in the next chapter. All right. So as mentioned here, the controller class has a property named temp data, and the temp data it's mostly used for transferring data between controllers. All right. As mentioned, it's often used with a PRG pattern. Okay. All right. Let's finish this page, then we're going to take a break. So it says when you read an item from temp data, it's marked as read, but there are other things that you can do with this. So notice what it says. Even if you marked it as read, if you run the keep property on it, it's basically like if you checked it that it's read, it unchecks it, for lack of better words. All right. As it says, even if it's already been read. All right. And keep does it for everything. Keep with a key does it only for the key that you put in. All right. And what peek does, peek is always a look ahead type of thing. So it reads the value and it'll let you know whether it's been read or it's not been read yet. All right. So again, keep is for everything, and the other two are for a key. So you're only working with one associated value. All right. So as mentioned here, use peek when you want to know whether you want the value to stay marked as unread. Again, it's a look ahead. Use the normal read and keep if you want it to use a condition to determine whether or not it should be marked as unread. All right. So with that said, we don't have too much to go, but let's take a break because it is 1:02. Let's take till 1:50. We'll finish this up. We got about 10 or 15 more pages, but I want to go through version 2 of this NFL Teams app so we can look at the differences. So I'll see you back here at 1:15, please. All right, it is 1:15. I wanted to mention a couple things to you before we go on. 3 weeks from tomorrow is the job fair. If you hadn't heard that already, you may have already gotten an email on that. As it says here, it's at the St. Louis campus from 9 a.m. till noon. All right, there will be one, I think around the beginning of April at the Wentzville campus, but there won't be nearly the number of people there or number of companies. This has got, right now, she's at 307 companies. Okay. And out of those 307, when I go and take a look at it by department order and I go down to AWD, there were about 15 companies that had listed AWD. They're right here. All right. So, whoops. And some of them are going to be ones that you may or may not be interested in working in with. I don't know. But there's Spectrum, Arco, Gateway Fiber, Stiefel, Natoli Engineering, and there's more as well. All right. One you guys might want to be interested in, all right, is you might want to check out this Doherty Business Solutions. All right. Evan has gotten 2 or 3 of his grads in the past, I think, have been employed from them. What they do is they bring you in, and for lack of better words, you're going in as an intern. You get paid. Don't get me wrong. And the average starting salary from the last time I heard was about 55 a year. But what they do is they bring a bunch of people in and they interview you and they may even give you a test. I don't know. Evan could tell you that for sure. But if you're chosen to work for a company, you're basically there on a 6-month contract. And it's a prove it or lose it type of thing. Most people prove it and then they're given a raise and they're given a full-time position. So if you're interested in that, that's one I definitely recommend. People always ask too, as far as, well, I've got this electronic portfolio. You still should have a regular resume, and you should have a link on your regular resume to your portfolio. All right. If you've got it on GitHub Pages or someplace else. I've been trying to show the new people iwt.rankin.edu, and it's been down for the last few weeks every time I've tried to look at it. So I don't even know if that server is still in commission or not in commission. Not only that, for this thing as well, where is that? Okay, I thought I had it, but I got it here someplace. There. All right, I'm going to send you this. It's got job fair preparedness tips. And they're also having, again, like I said, I will send you everything I've gotten. But they're also having a couple workshops where they'll look at your resumes and give you tips, etc. So if you're interested in that. The other thing I wanted to tell you, and this isn't much notice, I get it, I'm sorry, but this Friday, and I'll have to check on the time for this. This is not 5 hours long, but I believe there will be presentation from 10:30 till about 12:30, and from 12:30 till about 2:30 or so, or it might be 1:30 to 3:30. I don't know. But this Leidos company, all right, they do work with Scott Air Force Base and with some other places. Again, they have hired Rankin grads in the past for a lot of different types of jobs, including AWD. They're going to be there, and they're going to be broadcasting a thing right from inside of, I believe, Evan's classroom. I will send you this because what it's going to have here is the meeting ID and everything else that you'll need to get into it. Now, if you don't care, I don't care. I'm going to go listen to the one in the afternoon. I might even listen to one in the morning because you guys have got lab and so does my morning class. I might listen to both of them. But again, from what I've heard, this is another company that typically their starting salary is somewhere in the mid 50s. So it'd be a nice place to get into. It's a nice starting salary. All right. And again, I don't know any more about them. They had a thing that they did last year. All right. They first gave a PowerPoint presentation and they talked about what they do and they talked about what they're looking for in employees, and then they open it up to a lot of Q&A type of thing. But I will send you this at the end of class today. I will include it in the email that you get at the end of every class, and I will send you all the stuff I've got from the job fair as well. All right. And the skies have opened up near me and it's pouring like crazy. So I'm hoping that I don't lose my internet connection, but I guess we'll see. All right. So this brings us to page 318. And as you can see here, this is version 2 of the NFL Teams app. Okay, as it says, it'll work with redirection, the PRG pattern, and the use of temp data. All right. So it doesn't look that different. Really doesn't look different in here. Okay. But as they mention, in this version of the app, the team logo is a clickable image link rather than just an image. All right. And they say you can tell it because when you put your mouse over it, the cursor changes to a pointer, etc. Now, it says after the user clicks on the team logo, a details page comes up like what is shown here. I wouldn't call that a lot of detail. All right. But it does have the team logo, the team name, the conference the team is in, the division the team is in. But as I mentioned to you earlier, if you do go in and you click the add to favorites, you are going to end up getting a message that says, in this case, Seattle Seahawks has been added to favorites, but they really aren't. All right. It's a pseudo ad. It's false. It's not really adding it anywhere. And I think they do that in the next chapter. Hoping I didn't mix up my chapters 8 and 9, but we'll see. All right. There you go. You should know that for now, the NFL Teams app doesn't actually store the user's favorite team anywhere. Rather, it just displays the notification and does a redirect. In addition, it doesn't remember the user's previous conference and division selection. Rather, it displays everything. But in the next chapter, we'll go into using session state and cookies. All right. So that's the message. But again, nothing really and truly is happening to actually do that. All right. Okay. So as mentioned here, this version uses the PRG pattern to add a team to favorites and the temp data to provide the notification message to the user. There are other ways of doing it other than temp data. All right. We probably will get into those in a later chapter. All right. So the rest of the chapter, and we'll go through this fairly quickly, probably be done in 10 or 15 minutes, but it goes through the changes that are going to have to be made. All right. For instance, it says right here, this uses a razor for each statement within a UL to loop through all the team's objects. Since there are 32 of them, it doesn't show all of them. You should have this program though. All right. You should have this program in the folder that you got at the beginning of the semester. You may want to open that up, have it available to you. Just open it up in a regular editor or whatever when you're doing some of the homework assignments. It may end up helping you. All right. As it says, the next figure also shows the details action method that handles the get requests. Okay. That the image links send to the server. As it says, it starts by creating a team object. Notice it uses the first or default. By now, that should make sense to you. meaning it's either going to return something or it's going to return a default value, which is typically going to be null, or depending on how we wanted this, all. All right. So the code for this is shown. Okay, as it says, remember, that's what the details action method for get request sends to the view. All right. Now, they even mentioned in here, much of the code is going to be similar to what we've looked at earlier. All right. So if we take a look in here, as far as the way we've used a for each, this looks pretty similar. All right. What's different in there is when you look at the ASP-route-ID, it's an add teams.team ID. Okay. And most of the rest, again, you can see the stuff that's changed. All right. And when I say changed, well, you've got the two hidden fields at the bottom. We've been doing that in the past anyway to go pass in information, but in the past, we've only used it to pass in an ID field. Now notice we're passing in both the team ID and the team name. All right. So we have that available to us if we were to need it. All right. A couple more pages here. As it says, the next figure is going to show the add action, not add edit, but an add action. So notice it receives a team object when the user clicks the add to favorites button. However, it doesn't do anything with it. Again, as I already mentioned, in chapter 9, you'll learn how to add or how to store this data in session state using and with cookies. All right. All right. Then they mention when the add receives the team name and ID, it creates a new team object and it assigns that basically that stuff. And it says in chapter 10, we're going to learn even more about how this works. And as I think I mentioned to you before, I've been going on. I'm on about chapter 14 in the book, something like that. But it appears as though every 2 chapters is kind of a good cutoff point, all right, for having a test. Now it's going to be interesting when we get into chapter 9 and chapter 10, because chapter 9, what you do in there is you create a game called Pig, and we'll get into that later. And then in chapter 10, you create tic-tac-toe. All right. Those are going to be the projects for those 2 chapters. Okay. And again, it says here the add method uses the PRG pattern to avoid the resubmission error and temp data to preserve data across more than one request. All right. Again, the layout view, as they mention in there, it's again going to be very similar, but it says this version has an if statement that checks whether or not the temp data has a message key. If it does, as it says, it reads the item associated with a key. All right. And of course, if it doesn't, there's nothing more to do with it. So they're showing that here. So you're using some conditional logic right there. And that's it. So one more time. In chapter 8 for our projects, there's 2 of them. All right. It says you will build a data-driven web app that uses view models to pass data from controllers to views, the view bag object to pass data from views to the layout, and temp data to persist data between requests. So we have this trip log. All right. And as you can see with this trip log, what do we have in here? Well, adding a destination, adding information, adding things to do at a certain place. All right. So read through the specs. We'll take a look at them in more detail. Okay, we'll take a look at them in more detail next week. And again, I'm going to go through this weekend and attempt to build it. But as I mentioned to you then, chapter 9 is going to be to build this pig game. If you do have your C# book, if you still have your C# book, I believe they built pig inside of that book. I could be wrong, but I believe they did. All right. And then in chapter 10, like I said, it's going to be tic-tac-toe. Right? And finally, then jumping into the case study, okay? As mentioned, you'll use Temp Data to display messages to say the product was added. And I believe in the same way, you're not going to actually add it till like chapter 9. All right. And that's when we'll do some updating. Okay. That's what I have. So unless you guys have any questions, all right. We'll just pick it up here on Monday. All right. And that'll be your test. I'll have the test. I will have it sent out to you by no later than 7 a.m. on Monday. As always, I'll spend the first 15 minutes of class on Monday going over it. All right. Have a good weekend.